I don't see PlayStation selling 10 million copies of a new IP, no matter how good. I mean, it will over time, but I'm saying in that 3 days, it seems. When you look at Resident Evil 4 Remake, I mean, that did 4 million in a week or something. That seems so low to me when I heard that. But I mean, those are great numbers, but it goes to show you how rarefied those kinds of numbers truly are. And Ragnarok doing what, 12 million or something, whatever it is great, but that took time. I just don't think Sony has Sony really doesn't have, it's not zero, but close to zero potential of doing that with a new IP. And I don't know that maybe Spider-Man or something, but I don't even think the install base is we're dealing with an install base of 120 million versus an install base of 40 million or less. So that has to be taken into account too. So if Spider-Man 2 is coming out in that environment, maybe, but I don't think so. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
I think Spider-Man has the highest potential to do that just because it's Spider-Man. It's like a universal. It is a PlayStation IP, technically speaking, in games, or at least in this current run. But it's just a culturally ubiquitous character, and that I think could, in the right circumstances, with the right amount of machines out there in the wild and the right amount of players even clued into the ecosystem, could do that. I think, but even so, like I don't know, because how much did Spider-Man? How much did the first Spider-Man do?
25 million, I want to say, over like cumulative.
That was over a while, right? Yeah. Like in 3 days, I don't think it did 10 million.
No, not even close.
And that was with an install base of a pretty sizable number of PS4s. And that's a I know it's a new IP technically, but it's not really. I mean, Spider-Man's not a new IP. People were stoked for that game immediately.
Yeah, I found the data here. It's 3 days, 3.3 million copies, Spider-Man.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's that's, by the way, with a healthy install base of PS4s. It's pretty late into because that was 2018, right?
Right. Yeah, so it's a nice install base. Yeah, of 80 million maybe at that point. I think.
Yeah.
What's interesting here too, Chris, is the cumulative number of Spider-Man between Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales is like 35 million, something like that. And I think Breath of the Wild is at 25 or 30 million. So Spider-Man does comparable long-term numbers, I guess, maybe, but it's not the same. Dustin, what do you think about this? Do we have any hope? I mean, what would it be? Let me put it in context even. The Last of Us Part 1, The Last of Us Part 2 sold as many copies on PlayStation 4 as Zelda did in 3 days on Switch. That's the equivalence. And there's no doubt that, I mean, in my mind, that The Last of Us Part 2 is a wonderful game. It just goes to show you, again, the different scale. And Sony made a healthy amount of money on that, too. So imagine how much money Nintendo just made. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple different factors that we can look at this. I mean, first of all, when you're comparing Zelda, the Switch is now the third best-selling console of all time. Mm-hmm. They have 125 million Switches out there compared to PlayStation 5. And this is just me looking on Wikipedia, though these numbers are usually updated and decently accurate. Right now, PlayStation 5 is at 38.4 million. Again, this is Wikipedia, but just overall, general context that in order to sell that many that quickly, you're going to need a much larger install base. But let's just say in a hypothetical situation that there was a lot more PS5s out there. I think that, and not to turn this into a huge Tears of the Kingdom conversation again, but Nintendo does a very good job in attracting both kids and adults to games. And obviously, there's some degree with Mario when you play as an adult, when you play, let's say, the main campaign. I don't expect it to be very hard or necessarily very deep in terms of how I'm thinking about mechanics and stuff like that, but I expect it to be fun. What's really interesting to me about Tears of the Kingdom is that it's a really hard game. It's a very thought-provoking game as far as how you think about the puzzles and stuff like that. And it appeals to everyone. Holly has students that are in elementary school that are playing it. Kids in my extended family that are all playing it. I think my little cousin, who I think is in 3rd grade, is playing it. They love it. They're obsessed with it. So you have these young kids. Then you have people like us, like Chris and I, who I think it's one of the best games of the year at the very least, right? That are so intrigued by its mechanics and its depth. And then when I was in line at Target to buy it, there was someone that I would say was probably in their 60s buying it and playing it. So I just don't think that Sony has a single IP that is that appealing across the board, you know? And obviously Nintendo has this long running IPs. They've got nostalgia, but I think that nostalgia can take you pretty far, but not those numbers. There needs to be some substance there. So it's not that I don't think that Sony could ever do it, but they would have to. I don't know. They've tried with games that are more kids friendly. You think about something like Ratchet and Clank, which is an awesome game, an amazing game, but it just doesn't have that same quality to it. And I don't really know what it is. I'm sure Sony would love to have IPs that would appeal to everyone across the board like that, but it just hasn't necessarily worked out for them yet.
All right. I don't know, Dexter. It's an interesting question. Could Sony do it? Yeah, the install base needs to be higher. And I don't know what franchise it would be that would do it. If it's not Spider-Man, God of War did really well, but it took a couple months for it to do those numbers. So, no.
Bring back Blasto.
Blasto, yeah.
Dude.
AI Phil Hartman voice.
Yeah.
Maybe I like you think about like Uncharted. It's like no way. It's just
No.
There's just no way.